by the All England Tennis Club. And I want to put on record the committee and planning department's appreciation for the high levels of engagement from residents and the applicant, which has gone into the report before us this evening. Since May last year, the committee has been preparing for the task at hand tonight. We've held 4 site visits, covering the whole distance around the site on each visit. Our pursuit of knowledge extended to participating in 7 specialised training events, delivered on a wide range of subjects, including ecology, heritage, and legal matters. And we owe a debt of gratitude to our officers for their guidance in these sessions. As you review the modification sheets available online, you will read that our committee has already posted hundreds of inquiries to inform tonight's decision. In the commentary I've read about the committee, I believe that what may have been overlooked is, while we are councillors and decision makers, we are also residents of the borough. We share the same appreciation for Wimbledon Park and share a desire for it to flourish. That is why local decision making in our planning system is the cornerstone of our democratic process. It is here in the rooms like this that the needs, wants and dreams of the community is heard and the future of our beloved borough is shaped. I'm now going to turn to outline some essential information to help everyone's understanding of tonight's proceedings. So I can confirm there is not going to be any fire drills planned this evening, and if the alarm does go off, security teams will escort you out, and ourselves and the applicant as well. I would appreciate everyone's help tonight keeping to time with minimal interruption. I anticipate we will be voting on our first application no earlier than 11:30 p.m. So you can help us all stick to time by keeping expressions of support or concern to a minimum. Furthermore, it is of paramount importance that everyone is treated with respect and that there is no interruptions when anyone speaks. So this is important, and we will help ensure all viewpoints are fully heard and we can consider it as members the information we've been presented. If this is not adhered to, I will restart speaking time and may ask any persons or groups to leave the meeting. Just also to be aware, we don't decide planning on what could or what should, but what is in front of us and the facts of the case at hand. We will take 15-minute breaks approximately every 2 hours throughout the evening, and staff present will direct you to facilities. If residents in the chamber need to leave at any time, please do so through the back doors and through the corridor parallel to the chamber. Committee members will use electronic devices as they see fit to support deliberations, and we are typically referred to each other by first names, and we'll be calling speakers by first names too. I'll now outline the process for each application tonight so everyone's aware of how we take business. So officers will present for no more than 30 minutes their report and reference the modification sheet. Then resident speakers will address the committee for 3 minutes each, and we have 2 speakers, 1 online, 1 in the chamber. Then ward councillors for a total of 6 minutes. In the case of the first application, we have 3 ward councillors from Village speaking a minute each, and 1 ward councillor from, 3 ward councillors from Wimbledon Park speaking a minute each, and 1 ward councillor from Village speaking 3 minutes. And they've worked together to agree those arrangements. Then the Member of Parliament for the site area will speak for 2 minutes. Then the applicant and agent will have up to 6 minutes to speak and respond to any points raised. Normally, officers will have an opportunity to respond to any points made, but we will instead go straight to questions. And we'll take questions from the committee 2 at a time. We will review this application in 3 sections, and I will outline after the speakers have completed their section what those sections will be. Throughout the evening, the committee can ask factual questions of any of the speakers that has previously spoken through myself. These questions must be to obtain fact rather than to extend speaking time. And we'll then move on to comments or general observations, and we may need to debate any additional conditions or additional points, and then we'll move to the vote on the recommendation in the paper plus any additional points, voting in the order voting against, not voting, and voting for. Okay, so let's get underway. Callum, can you please present the application?
Thank you, Chair. The presentation is fairly short, just because I know we're going to get into quite a lot of the detail later. The site comprises Wimbledon Park Golf Club. It also comprises part of Wimbledon Park Lake and an area.
Sorry, Callum, I need to apologise there. Colleagues and everyone watching and at home, I've actually made a mistake. So what we actually do need to do, because I was so excited to get going, is I've of course missed apologies, declarations of interest, and all the important bits there. So that is completely my fault, and I apologise. So in terms of just restarting there, so apologies I've received from Simon McGrath, and subbing is Susie Hicks. Matthew Willis has been subbed by Kirsten, and Martin Milton has been subbed by Stuart Neverson. Can I have declarations of interest, Susie?
Sorry, I'm afraid I have several. The first one is I've been a member of the Wimbledon Society since October last year, and I maintain regular contact with many local residents associations, including the Wimbledon Union of Residents Association. In consequence, I've been kept up to date by all of them on their views, submissions, and opposition to this application. Secondly, I'm a ward councillor for Hillside, which is said in the officer's report to be a potential beneficiary of the proposed scheme by increasing access for Hillside residents to green space. And finally, I'm a member of the Liberal Democrats, and as a group, the Liberal Democrats are strongly opposed to this application. Because I'm a member of DPAC, I have not taken any part in campaigning and have not been involved in discussions about this. However, there was a line on the website put up before the elections last year and before I joined DPAC, which, forgive me, described me, gave a bio, and said that I have been supporting local Lib Dem campaigns to keep Wimbledon Park from being concreted over, get step-free access installed at Rains Park, and prevent intrusive, overly tall, or otherwise inappropriate developments in the area. However, mindful of my position on DPAC, I have not been engaged in campaigning against this proposal, and I have been on the site visits, read the papers with an open mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, Andrew, you wanted to come back? Okay. Sherry-Ann?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to declare that for a period of time, I worked for Thorncliffe until August 2022, to be exact, who I understand have been instructed on Alltech on this application. However, my period of employment with them did not cross over with their work on the application, and I have advised the legal officers of this prior to this meeting. Thank you.
Councillors, first of all, my name is Andrew Swaffer. I'm legal advisor to the committee this evening. Both of you, thank you for drawing this to my attention. I'm incredibly grateful. I've considered carefully, and on reflection, I am content for you to continue to determine this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Yes, so on to the next item. So minutes from a previous meeting. Can I have someone second that they are true and fair, accurate account? Ed, thank you very much. Noted. Now, without further ado, on to our first application. Callum, please proceed.
Thanks very much, Chair. So the site comprises Wimbledon Park Golf Club. It also comprises part of Wimbledon Park being Wimbledon Park Lake, and it also contains a section of Church Road. Wimbledon Park Golf Club, that's the site ceased operation for golf in January 2023. The golf course itself was historically a private members club without public access, but one could go on site to pay and play, or if you're a private member. To the northeast of the site is council-owned Wimbledon Park over here. To the west, on the other side of Church Road, is Alltech's main grounds, which is where the championships are held every year for 2 weeks. There's a portion of the site which lies in London Borough of Wandsworth, and the dividing line is around here. And that's why this application is also being submitted to London Borough of Wandsworth. Central to the existing site is the Wimbledon Club. That's not to be confused with the All England Club or the Wimbledon Park Golf Club, but it's his own recreational club that focuses on cricket. The general topography of the site is that of a bowl with the land sloping towards the lake. The surrounding area is generally residential, with the exception of LTEC's main grounds. The site also contains Wimbledon Park Golf Club, Wimbledon Park Golf Clubhouse, which is just out of shot over here. There's a number of constraints on the site, planning constraints which are of note. The site is metropolitan open land. It forms part of a registered park and garden due to it being a remnant of historic landscape design by Capability Brown. The registered park and garden includes council-owned Wimbledon Park. It includes the golf course site and also includes Wimbledon Park Lake. The site is also located in Wimbledon North Conservation Area. There's a significant number of trees on site, which are subject to tree preservation order. And the site is also ecologically sensitive and has a SINC designation. So turning to the proposals themselves, proposed development comprises 38 grass tennis courts, 8,000-seater Parkland show court, a central grounds maintenance hub, 2 player hubs, 7 satellite maintenance hubs, works to Wimbledon Park Lake, including desilting and construction of a boardwalk, highway works to Church Road, the creation of a permissive access public park, which I'll now refer to as the LTEC Parkland. And the proposals also involve significant tree and ecological enhancement works. Just to clarify, the application is submitted in hybrid form. So all matters relating to certain buildings are reserved, and the buildings are the 8,000-seater show court, the 2 player hubs, central grounds, and the central grounds maintenance hub. However, it should be noted that the applicant has submitted a set of design guidelines and parameter plans which must be complied with at reserved matters. So just turning on to the reasons, the principal reasons for the development. So currently the qualifying event takes place in Roehampton, and this development aims to bring the qualifying event adjacent to LTEC's main site in the week prior to the championships. The qualifying event is currently has a capacity of 6,000, so that would be increased to 10,000. But in addition, the proposals aim to improve the championships, both player and guest experience, and increase its capacity from 42,000 to 50,000. Alongside that, the proposals aim to deliver multiple benefits relating to heritage, open space, recreation, and community, as outlined in the officer report. So this is just a CGI showing development as a whole. And what I'll do is I'll just focus on the particular parts as I go through. So just go, there's 38 tennis courts, and you can see they're dotted around the site to the north, in the northern part of the site, whilst you've got the LTEC Parkland to the south. This is a CGI of what they would look like, court would look like during the championships. You can see it would be in a Parkland setting. It would have these canvas screens during the qualifying event also. So the Parkland show court itself would be located centrally and is positioned to read amongst the in line with the LTEC's main site, adjacent to their other show courts. The show court has an 8,000-seater capacity, but the details are reserved for future consideration. The show court would contain a hub for qualifying and contain guest and event operation facilities. But the actual tennis in the spectator bowl, that would be used during the championships. So this is just a CGI of what the Parkland show court would look like looking north. but I should clarify that it is subject to reserve matters. So the LTEC Parkland, that's a 9.4 hectare parkland located to the south of the site. And it's located around here. It would be 9.4 hectares. It would contain the Central Grounds Maintenance Hub to the south, and it also contain the retained golf clubhouse car park. It's divided from the north of the site, where LTEC's estate would be, their private estate, by a sunken hedge, otherwise known as a ha-ha, which is a feature used in the Capability Brown landscapes. The LTEC Parkland would be open for most of the year, except for agreed closure periods during and around the tournament period. The LTEC Parkland would provide new links between Wimbledon Park and Church Road, and it would also connect up to the new boardwalk. So Central Grounds Maintenance Hub, which is located to the south, as I was saying, adjacent to Home Park Road. That is a subterranean structure split across 2 levels, and that would contain offices for LTEC, but also where they would store most of their grounds equipment to serve the new parkland. Works to the lake. So as part of the proposals that LTEC are proposing to desilt the lake, which is currently very shallow in places, limiting or creating problems for recreation. The proposals also would excavate the southern lake tip, so it would restore the lake to its original shape as designed by Capability Brown. There'd be the creation of the new boardwalk on the lake, which would enable a walkway all around the lake for the first time. And the proposals also include deculverting 2 drains which feed the lake or streams, underground streams, and opening those up. The proposals also include new pontoons which be attached to the boardwalk. So there are 2 player hubs proposed. The first, these are reserved, details reserved and submitted in outline. There's the Northern Player Hub, which would be positioned adjacent to the athletics track. And this would contain player welfare facilities for during the qualifying event and championships. These adopt an organic design. You can see they would have a green roof. And be set in a parkland setting. Southern Player Hub has a slightly different design that would be located on the southern lake tip. And that would read as a boathouse. And again, that would contain player welfare facilities for during the qualifying event and championships. In addition, there's 7 satellite maintenance hubs. This is a typical hub, hub number 3, and these would contain toilet facilities for spectators at the championships and qualifying event, but they'd also contain space for groundskeeping as well. The proposals also involve ecological enhancement works across the site. So just to point out a few, for example, the proposals involve significant tree planting, but also creation of acid grassland in the LTEC Parkland, a reinforced woodland edge in many places, deculverting the streams and improving the ecological value along those. And various areas of longer meadow grass, which would be good for biodiversity. Also in the lake, there'd be a new lakeside habitat in the form of reed beds. So that's a rough overview of the main points of the proposal. In terms of the planning assessment, as detailed in the report, officers identify there's some notable harm, and that includes harm to the metropolitan open land. Also notable is harm to heritage assets, most notably the Wimbledon Park RPG and the Wimbledon North Conservation Area and St Mary's Church. But on the other hand, the proposals deliver significant public benefits. And these are split up into these different categories in the report. So heritage-related public benefits, ecological enhancement, economic and employment benefits, benefits relating to community, open space, sports and recreation. And in light of that and the whole, our overarching conclusion is that proposed developments would carry substantial public benefits which amount to very special circumstances that demonstrate harm to the MOL, as well as other harm is clearly outweighed by other material planning considerations. So as a result, we are recommending approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Callum, for that presentation. So we are now going to call our public speakers. So can I ask Richard to speak for 3 minutes? Is Richard available, Jake, online?
Good evening, Wimbledon Village calling. Thank you very much for my 3 minutes. Can you hear me okay?
Good evening, I can hear you, Richard. Thank you very much. Are we ready to set the timer? Go.
Thank you.
Live.
Thank you very much. You find me in my study overlooking what was the 12th hole of the golf course. So this is directly in my backyard. I think I'm 6 o'clock on the drawings you've been showing. So right next to the park. I moved into the village, had the good fortune and privilege to move in 2019, knowing that as a golf fanatic that I was going to be looking over a golf course. I should have paid more attention and realized that it would soon be changing to tennis. And fortunately, I like tennis. So I look at this project like any other big project and say there's 4 factors that really matter. One is the All England Tennis Club have enough money to do this job properly. 2, they are expert at risk management. I don't know of any other company that had pandemic insurance before COVID-19 as an exemplar. Thirdly, they have a global brand that they have to protect. So when rumors in newspapers go out saying there's going to be a hotel built, I mean, it's absolute hogswash because they have that brand. They have to do the right thing. And so there'll be challenges, but they will do the right thing. And finally, they have a great social conscience. As a neighbour for the 4 years, I've found them an absolute pleasure. To the project itself, I think there's huge public benefit. And we'll see those benefits because it's phased in short order. My expectation is if you approve it tonight, we'll see the lake and the park opening in 3 to 4 years' time. Accessible to all, which I think is absolutely fantastic. There are issues, and I particularly think of the Parkland Show Court that I know you're not deciding on today, but I asked the All England Club, where would you put it if you didn't put it there? There's no space on the other side of the road. It really is the only place for it. And we do need to support a local business that generates profits, that subsidizes every beer I drink in the village, because the profits every business make are subsidized by the business profits they make in the 2 to 3 weeks of the championships. So finally, I did the walking tour with everybody. I think now I asked the club how many people had been to look at the park and look at the plans on the walking tour. Over 6,000 people have taken part in that tour. And the overwhelming majority were in support of the project once they'd understood the benefits to the wider society of this, both as well presented in your presentation. So, and I do wish well to people on all sides of this, but I feel quite passionate that this is a great project. There will be challenges. 10,000 lorries was one example, but I look at that over 4 years and I go, well, that's the same as 20 a day. I get 20 buses past my house in an hour. So there has to be perspective, and therefore I'm very happy to support the project and wish one and all good fortune going forward. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Richard, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Appreciate your time. I'd like now to ask Susan to speak for 3 minutes. Susan.
Is it the red one? Which one is it? Oh, it's on. Thank you. Thank you very much. I am speaking for the Save Wimbledon Park group, supported by 15 societies and residents associations around Wimbledon. And 13,200 and however petitioners, which is growing. We have the support of 2 local MPs, Fleur Anderson and Stephen Hammond. We care about protecting the environment and precious green spaces from greedy commercial developers, and so must you. Please save Wimbledon Park from this aggressive, inappropriate commercial development. Merton and Wandsworth have received over 2,000 individually written letters of objection. Over the 8 years of construction, Capability Brown's heritage landscape will be bulldozed and re-leveled. Hundreds of trees will be felled. Habitats for lots of protected creatures will be destroyed. They will never come back. I know Richard has said something about 10,000 lorries. It's not 10,000, it's 40,400. Just think about the damage that that will be doing to your lungs. And for what? Just 2 or 3 weeks of tennis a year. This is not sport and recreation. It's commercial entertainment. Wimbledon is already at the pinnacle, the only grass court Grand Slam in the world. This expansion won't change that. No very special circumstances can justify this destruction. The future of our environment is much more important. The officer's report in front of you overrules expert advice from your own conservation officer and your own environmental consultant. It also ignores expert submissions that biodiversity and urban greening have been grossly overclaimed by the developer. The harm will be substantial. Just as your design review panel and your local plan inspectors require, this entire park needs a visionary, much more sensitive approach. The developer will make all sorts of promises. They did that in 1993, saying they wouldn't develop. And where are we now? We love the tennis. We want it to succeed, but this is not the way. Your decision tonight will have massive consequences for the preservation of green spaces across London and the country. This will be your legacy. Tens of thousands of us want you to do the right thing. Please refuse this application.
Thank you, Susie, and thank you at the back of the hall. Thank you. So I'd like to call ward councillors to speak in the following order, and we'll be speaking. The first 3 councillors will be speaking for a minute each, so please bear with us for changeovers. So I'd like to call Jill to speak first.
This is detrimental to the community, and the applicants have not made a clear case for this overdevelopment of the land. 38 grass courts, 28-metre tall, 8,000-seater stadium. Each new court will be built with concrete bases and rims out of keeping with the pastoral landscape. It's a precious green space, the lungs of the community. We need these green spaces to allow us to breathe freely, and so do local wildlife. Building on this land would be an environmental disaster. The submitted environmental impact assessment fails to address reasonable alternatives to the submission as required by legislation. It's contrary to the National Planning Policy Framework. The economic statement fails to set out how the economic benefits would accrue to the community. Rather, it will only benefit LTEC, a rich private club. It constitutes a major loss of amenity. The golf club was open to Merton residents to play there. LTEC is not transforming private land to public land, far from it.
Thank
It's
you,
just
Jill. Thank you. Sam?
This is protected metropolitan open land, and the applicant is required to show very special circumstances in order to build on it. And yet the benefits cited fail to make that case in a submission that includes the misleading. The lakeside walk is a pre-existing obligation and not a new benefit. The arbitrary. The promised parkland is purely permissive with access at the whim of the All England Club. The miserly. Public use of the 38 grass tennis courts is limited to just 7. And the illusory. Section 106 monies include off-site items the council are due to install themselves next year. And yet the officer's report implausibly states that these are significant benefits to which substantial weight is given. For further examples, I'll refer you to the excellent submission from PRA, which reaches the same conclusion. Put simply, if this application is granted, then the future of metropolitan open land is on a slippery slope, and it's most certainly not a green one.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to turn to our last speaker, Tony. Tony.
There are serious errors in the applicant's treatment of the environment. The London plan seeks to achieve an overall gain in biodiversity through urban greening. Greening serves to ameliorate the environmental harm from the concrete and the other hard surfaces in developments, such as this industrial tennis complex in an existing green belt site, which currently has an urban greening factor of 0.99. The applicant has now revised their original claim of a near perfect factor of 0.95 down to 0.9. In fact, on a correct calculation, see Dr. Dawson's paper, this development has a factor of 0.8, probably nearer 0.7. That's a massive 25% net loss in greening. Interestingly, the applicant still hasn't challenged this paper. There are further serious flaws in the applicant's tree audit. So there's a clear failure to comply with the London Plan environmental policies. We need to refuse planning permission, tell the applicant to reach a compromise that avoids this harm to greening.
Thank you very much, Tony. And I'd like to now call Max, who will speak for 3 minutes. Max.
I speak purely as a ward councillor, giving voice to those who have made representations to me. Village residents are very proud that their neighbourhood is home to the Wimbledon Championships, and it is an excellent visitor attraction. But part of its charm is its setting in an English country garden located in a residential area, and the rights and opinions of those residents also matter. Should this application be passed, it would necessitate the extension of traffic management orders that would restrict access to large numbers of property for nearly 1 month of the year. This loss of amenity, hardly referenced in the Planning Office's report, must be considered by the committee. Unless committee members are totally satisfied that there are genuine, very special circumstances that justify the application in full, including justifying an 8,000-seat show court, they are bound to reject it. I won't re-rehearse arguments that colleagues have already made around the VSCs, but I want to make 2 main points. One, Wimbledon as a national cultural institution. Qualifying tournaments need playing courts, not show courts. And no assessment has been included in the Planning Office's report as to what options are open to the applicant. Could the qualifying tournament be brought to the site, ostensibly the prime motivation for the application being made in the first place, without a show court? And number 2, public benefit. And this is not the fault of the applicant, but I am genuinely surprised by the Planning Officer's recommendation that the council take a transactional approach to dealing with very special circumstances for activities which the council is responsible to discharge. I'm also surprised that the officer's report has concluded that substantial harm that they have identified can actually be mitigated through very special circumstances. There is no single VSC which alone mentioned in the Planning Officer's report would justify this application, and the catalogue that have been prepared to strengthen the application could equally be applicable to others seeking to build on metropolitan open land. The council must be conscious of the risk of setting a precedent that other developers might seek to exploit. Wimbledon will remain the home of global lawn tennis and a leading national cultural institution. No one wants to see it any other way. But I have concluded that this application in its current form must be seen as incompatible with our collective duty and policy to protect metropolitan open land. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max, for your passionate plea on behalf of your residents. I'd like to call now Stephen Hammond. Stephen.
You, as I've received more correspondence about this application than any other in my time in Parliament. Let me take you to 3 points. In summary, the officers acknowledge there'll be some short-term impact on ecology and biodiversity, but believe this will be outweighed by the longer-term ecological enhancements. Yet if the committee look at paragraph 6.14.25, they would note the officers state there the short-term impacts are major. And if one looks at paragraph 6.13.41, Merton's own consultants' assessment of the environmental assessment statement adequacy is significantly less and varies considerably with that of the applicant. In the heritage section, officers identified the development would cause less than substantial harm, and yet in the officer's own report in the same section, they say this application gives rise to conflict with heritage policies in the development plan, notably London Plan Policy HC1 and Merton SPP Policy DMD4. In the Principles of Development section, development is considered inappropriate and result in definitional harm as per the MPPF paragraph 147. The Parkland Show Court would not preserve the openness of the MOL and is not compliant with MOL purpose. If this application passes tonight, the committee will have to consider that they will set a precedent to build on MOL parks and other spaces in Merton, London, and I think that is inappropriate, and that is why this application should be rejected. I believe tennis and Wimbledon are synonymous. I want to see a new application which benefits both the All England and the community.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for speaking. I'd like now to ask the applicant to speak, and I'm going to ask John to introduce, sorry, is it Sally who's going to be speaking? So Sally, if you speak, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and members. I'm Sally Bolton, Chief Executive of the All England Club, and I'm joined by Debbie Jevons, our Chair, and members of our board. We believe that our vision offers a truly unique opportunity to deliver one of the greatest sporting transformations for London since the 2012 Olympics. Wimbledon is one of sports and the UK's most significant and cherished events. We cannot take this position for granted in what is a hugely competitive and rapidly changing sporting marketplace. Without the Wimbledon Park project, there is a significant risk that we will fall behind the other Grand Slams. At present, we are the only Grand Slam that does not host its qualifying event on the same site as the main tournament. Qualifying for Wimbledon currently takes place in Roehampton on a rented site. We know because the players tell us that this holds us back in offering the best experience we possibly can. We have an acute need for a third show court, which mirrors that of the other Grand Slams. This includes a capacity of 8,000 and has the option of a roof to mitigate against disruptive weather. The limited space on our existing site, particularly as we have expanded our wheelchair and junior competitions, means the world's best tennis players are increasingly required to share practice courts, and spectators have limited opportunities to experience the rich diversity of competition that takes place across the championships. The Wimbledon Park project seeks to address all of these weaknesses. But just as importantly, we believe that our development will have a crucial role to play in the local community. We will transform one of the largest areas of private land in London into a beautiful new public park that is free for everyone to enjoy year round. And let us be clear, the public access to this park is offered permanently in the hope and expectation that it will become a treasured community facility on green space that has been inaccessible to the public for over 100 years. We are offering the chance to significantly improve the biodiversity of the land and will create opportunities for nature to thrive across the site. We're asking for the chance to help protect Wimbledon Park Lake through desilting works that will safeguard enjoyment of water sports for decades to come. As a result of all of these benefits, we will drive increased tourism, create hundreds of new jobs, and deliver a significant boost to London and Merton's economy every year. As a not-for-profit organisation, 90% of the money that we make from the championships goes to the Lawn Tennis Association, breathing new life into grassroots tennis across the country. Tonight, I'm appealing to you to help us to keep the championships and Merton at the very top of world sport. and at the same time, transform the leisure amenities for everyone's enjoyment, as together we secure Merton's place as the borough of sport for London. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, councillors, members of the public. My name is John Rocher. I'm a director at Rolf Judd Planning, and we're leading on the planning application on behalf of the All England Club. As you've heard from Sally, this is a very important proposal for the future of the championships and qualifying. It is also an incredibly important application for the future of this site and its role in Merton and Wandsworth. We recognise that a number of sensitive planning policy designations sit on the land. The site is metropolitan open land. It is part of a registered park and garden, and it is a conservation area. It is also a site of interest for nature conservation. We've spent considerable time researching and understanding the site. These designations and this research have been fundamental in the design and content of our planning application. It is also the case that the application site has been a private golf club for over 100 years with no general public access. The registered park and garden is identified by Historic England as being at risk, with much of the heritage obscured. Wimbledon Park Lake requires desilting to protect its long-term amenity, ecological and recreational value, and the on-site biodiversity has long been constrained by the golf course use. We acknowledge that our development will give rise to change and will result in impacts within the local area, particularly during construction. But we firmly believe these impacts will be outweighed by the considerable public benefits included within the proposals. Crucially, we believe there are very special circumstances which support the grant of planning permission. The significant public benefits, some of which you've heard of, which sits at the heart of these proposals, is a new 9.4 hectare public park, providing public access to a large section of the land for the first time, a heritage and Brownian-led approach to the design of the parkland, a new boardwalk providing public access to the entire lake for the first time, significant biodiversity improvements and substantial new tree planting, new bookable community space within the clubhouse and within the Parkland Show Court, community access to a number of the new tennis courts after the championships ends each year as part of the All England Club's community tennis programme, significant investment towards Wimbledon Park to improve facilities and help remove the entire registered park and garden from being at risk. The opportunity for borough residents to purchase tickets for the new Parkland Show Court during the championships, education programmes in coordination with local schools, and free tickets for school children to the qualifying events. Wimbledon is a world-class sporting event. This will, we believe, be a world-class development, not just transforming the championships, but transforming the role this land plays within the local area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John and Sally, for putting your case forward. So we've heard from a variety of speakers already tonight. So this is the point where the committee can ask questions, and they can of course ask questions of any of the speakers as well through the chair, and our officer Callum has the first opportunity to answer those questions. What I'd like to do first is just outline how we're going to take this application, and I stated that in the introduction. So what we're going to do is first spend around 15 minutes or so focusing on some of the conclusions of the report regarding the covenant, Day versus Shropshire, and how very special circumstances were determined to actually result in this recommendation. And then we're going to spend around an hour and a half or so going through the proposed development. We've got a series of maps that we put up, and we will first have a helicopter view of the site addressing macro issues of the site, and then go into detail across each of the sections, including the various proposed buildings. And then the third section will wrap up any issues relating to impact, and then do a deep dive on the conditions proposed and also the section 106. And again, that latter section will probably take similarly about an hour and a half. So what I'd like to do is ask for questions, particularly on anything to do with the covenant, Shropshire versus Day, or the review of very special balance. I don't mind kicking us off. We will have 2 questions at a time. Does anyone want to ask the second question at all? Susie asked the second question, so I'll ask the first one. So what would be helpful, Callum, is if you can just outline how you went about exploring the issues of the covenant and determine its level of materiality. And could you outline what that is for us as well? And Susie, your question.
Apologies, this isn't on Day and Shropshire. This was just a question for one of the speakers.
Okay, why don't we, if
We
does
need
it, if it's focused on a particular element of the application, then let's keep that reserved for when we
No,
go through the
I have-
application.
Many legal questions, but they're not on Day and Shropshire.
That's fine. We'll
Okay, I'll wait.
say that then. That's fine. Cool. All right. So I think, have you got any other questions on the legal side of things? No. Okay. So if you can address that aspect of the covenant and maybe address the same again for Day and Shropshire as well, that'd be quite helpful.
So I'll defer to our legal advisors on this question, which would be appropriate.
Callum, Chair, I'm grateful. In nothing I say now should undermine what's set out in the committee report, but if I can elaborate on a few areas, I'd be grateful. It won't take long. As a reminder, this particular application, as all others before you, committee members, are determined in respect of the planning merits before you and the consequences of the proposal. This committee, as has been clearly set out in the report, should not have regard or be influenced by the fact that the council's interests as owner of the retained lands in Wimbledon Park. It's often the case, and certainly my experience, and I suspect also it's become before you as well, that developers will need to resolve private law matters between themselves before they can go on and implement development, whether it be housing or in this case, a stadium. So all of those matters, obviously in this particular case, will have to be resolved before the development substantively proceeds. And to be clear, it's a trite matter of law that it is not in itself relevant to the assessment of the planning merits of the proposals. So that's my advice in relation to the materiality of the covenant, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are you able to give the same view on Shropshire versus Day?
In short, members will know, as will members of the public, that there has obviously been a disagreement between particularly the applicant and members of the public that oppose the scheme. Two conflicting sets of opinions have been provided. And one says that there's a statutory trust in place, and when there's a statutory trust in place, there flows certain requirements for the local authority to publicise and do other things, which would have needed to have been carried out in the circumstances in which a statutory trust existed. The applicant took advice also from leading counsel, King's Counsel, and concluded in the opposite. So what we've done, Chair, is, as well as myself looking at it and my colleagues, we've instructed two King's Counsel, two leading counsels, to have a look at this particular matter. Their advice was made public a couple of weeks ago from memory. And in short, they are of the view that the golf course land is not, and it has no point been, subject to a statutory trust. And officers have accepted that advice in the report. So, Chair, in summary, there is no part of the golf course land which is now held as a statutory trust. And as such, it is not a material consideration for this committee. Chair.
Thank you very much for clarifying that for us. I think then the final matter then in this section to address is how that very special circumstances was determined, Callum. And for me, I mean, we've already heard from Susie and also heard from Richard that there seems to be, for me, there's a paradox about time and benefits. So on one end, there's obviously a disruption to development, but then in the longer term, there is a wider benefit that's been articulated in your paper. Could you outline how that plays out in the very special circumstances, please?
Yeah, so the key point is, firstly, we identify whether there's any harm, and we've done that in relation to MOL, and we've identified there would be harm to MOL as a result of the impact on openness, principally due to the Parkland Show Court. And then we've also identified other harm in planning assessment, notably in relation to heritage. So once we've accounted for that harm, we then look to see what are the public benefits of the proposal. And as the officer report sets out, there are multiple public benefits. Some of those have been negotiated through the Section 106, for example, the off-site benefits to Wimbledon Park, which contribute to helping the Heritage at Risk Register and being removed from the RPG. And it's in light of all those public benefits where we consider, do they amount to very special circumstances as a whole? And our conclusion is yes, they do.
Thank you very much. So we've got a series of questions here. So I go Tom and then Dan. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. The officer and the All England, when they were speaking earlier, listed a lot of the benefits from the development, the lake, the parkland, biodiversity, tree planting, tickets to schools. I appreciate the officers have got to reach a balance, but it seems that none of the benefits come from 38 courts or a show court. This was a question that I raised that's in the modification sheet, but I don't think is necessarily covered. It'd be good to understand the extent to which that balance has to take into account the different elements of an application. You know, you could, for instance, say a block of flats could also say they were going to de-silt a lake, have a boardwalk around a lake, have parkland, invite schools to do things. Would that justify that? Because it seems from looking at the report, there's very few benefits that seem to come from the courts or the parkland. The All England didn't really say it in their remarks either. And I think, you know, most people would consider that that is actually the crux of what we're looking at.
Thank you. And I'll summarize in a second, Dan.
Well, I actually wanted to follow on from what Tom just said, because you kind of nicked my question, my friend. I wanted to also ask, do I understand this correctly? In order for this proposal to be justified, very special circumstances have to be met. And that's a balancing decision where we have to weigh up the pros and cons of what is being offered to the public here. And I agree with Tom, it does strike me a little bit funny that we're going to have 38 brand new grass courts and only 7 accessible to the public. So am I right in thinking that as part of this balancing exercise, if the applicant were to come to us and say, actually, we can do better, we can offer half of the courts, more of the courts open to the public, is that something that I would be allowed to consider in balancing whether very special circumstances have been met?
Cool. So just to recap, I think just summarizing here, because again, there's particular aspect of the schemes we'll deal in the next section. It is how does each of the individual items, I suppose, give weighted? And I think will be helpful also, Callum, because I was reminded by Andrew, could you clarify the difference between the planning balance and the very special circumstances balance that you've addressed?
Yeah, so I'll go on to your last point. The planning balance is essentially our balance at the end of the report, which balances all of the identified harm with the benefits, and the very special circumstances that comes at the end of that planning balance exercise. So it's kind of one of the same thing. In terms of your question about, you know, could another, it's kind of in my opinion, it delves into alternatives. You know, could another kind of development deliver the same kinds of benefits? It's kind of, I feel, sort of what you're getting at a little bit. And our job as officers is to consider what is being proposed in front of us, and objectively look at the benefits on offer in light of the proposals put forward by LTEC, including the show court, 38 courts. Mind you that we do identify benefits relating to their commercial operation of the site, relating to the championships, which includes some of the economic and employment benefits identified. But yeah, we have to assess the proposal on its merits, essentially.
Okay, thank you. John, please speak on this.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just also like to make the point in terms of alternatives. I mean, a residential scheme was mentioned by Tom. We have taken into account here the particular use that is being proposed and the impact that has. And whilst courts do have an impact on the land at the moment, they are relatively open. And the show court, yes, has the greatest impact. We acknowledge that, and we've assessed the harm of that. But of course, it also has a special link to what goes on across Church Road. So that is taken into account as well. And all of this forms the planning balance set against the public benefits as a collective, not as individual public benefits, as a collective. They form the very special circumstances.
Thank you very much. So is this on the very special circumstances? No, anything? No. So I'm feeling a desire to get on with actually talking about the meat of the actual application stuff. Is that correct? Yeah. Tom, do you want to come back on that?
Just a question about, sorry, question about a question. Where would the question about the sport and recreational use fit in? Is that a later bit?
That will be the next, we can talk about it in the next bit. Yeah. So why don't we move on then to our next section? So in this next section, we are going to be, so in this section, we're going to sort of review the proposed development using maps. So I'll ask Callum if you wouldn't mind to project first the first high level map, and that's the proposed general arrangement. And using these maps, we'll go into specific areas of the site. I'll give an outline of what the timing for that, the road for that in a second. So what I'd recommend is we'll spend at least an hour, but no more than 2 hours on this. I'm bearing in mind that we will be 2 hours midway here at committee 2 way through. So we may take a break halfway through and come back if that is suitable to colleagues. So a nod, good, sorry, good. So we'll wait for Callum to, so in terms of the order that we'll take this, so colleagues should have had a purple pack that you've got to hand, and that has all your maps in it. It's also at the back of your online pack. And in the order we'll take it is the proposed general arrangement, the detailed view 1, 2, 3, and then we'll go into sort of more of a deep dive. We'll look at the lake, the grass tennis courts, to your point, Tom, Parkland Show Court, and in the maintenance hubs, player hubs, and the golf clubhouse as well. While there's not a particular view of it, it has been mentioned as a bit of as a community benefit. And then we'll close that section off with the ecology proposals as well. So everyone, cool. And why don't we kick off then with questions about the proposed general arrangement? So that's anything on the land ownership, so the fragmented land ownership that was mentioned as one of the challenges for wider sites at risk. For example, general construction methods, because the challenges that we've heard, the difference of numbers, for example, that Susan and Richard mentioned. Any access questions or anything to do with energy or climate change or anything at all relating to that? So we've got Ed. Why don't you kick off, and Susie?
Thank you, Chair. One of the questions I have is at Roehampton, we've got less courts, 26, and it was really 38 here, but as has been touched on earlier, why is it that only 7 are available for community use? It seems if we're increasing the amount for or proposal, it could not more be made available. I'll start with that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. I think it's the question you wanted to ask previously.
I think, sorry, I have so many questions, but on the back of what Ed has just said, I have a question about the community courts as well. It looks to me, I could be wrong, as if they are going to work on the basis of being invitation only. Nobody's going to be able to rock up and say, I'd like to play today, unless they're part of some sort of tennis scheme organised by the All England. Have I got that right?
I think we'll no doubt have to put that to the applicant, but why don't we first ask Callum if he has that in these discussions. So I think summarising, ultimately it's about the courts, and John would like to come in on that, but it's about the courts and also the access arrangements to those courts.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have had that discussion with the applicant and the agent. There is a detailed explanation as to why the particular number of 7 courts has been put forward. It's to do with the need to maintain a certain standard of court, but the applicant, John Rocher, is best placed to answer that. And the second one too, please, Chair.
Brilliant. I'd like to bring John in to answer those points.
Thank you, Chair. It's a good question. You're right. The explanation you heard is primarily driven by the need to maintain the courts. So there is a real importance to maintaining what are championship courts or championship standard courts throughout the whole year. That maintenance regime, as you will see if you go onto the main site, is quite intensive given the standard of play and the nature of the grass. But I should stress the community courts numbers is actually a minimum of 7. We expect there'll actually be a larger number available at the time. The reason it's a minimum of 7 is because we need to recycle, because again, after the championships, courts need time to recover. There's a great deal of science, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, goes into the grass and the nature of those courts as they're prepared. So we've said in the Section 106, and it is in the heads of terms of Section 106, that it's a minimum 7. We expect those 7 courts to be not the ones on your screen now, but the ones to the south of the Wimbledon Club. And actually there's a cluster of greater number of courts. And just to the answer to how will it run? Well, we see this as very much an extension of the All England Club's community tennis programme. For those you might know, they have a facility down in Rains Park. That is a pay and play facility there as well. Also has 16 grass courts, which are available for anybody who signs up for a notional fee to play on. So we expect that that will be an extension on this site as part of that. It will also prioritise school children alongside others. So the intention is that after the championships finishes every year, those courts will be made available, a minimum of 7, probably a larger number though in the round. Those courts are in the southern part of the site. The courts in the northern part of the site, though, will be protected primarily because the needs to maintain them and bring them back up to play for the following year. They will also, on those courts, I should say, in the northern part of the site, they will host other tennis matches as well from the club, but also occasionally junior events, etc., etc. But primarily the play and play courts are those to the south, and it's a minimum of 7.
Thank you very much. Next set of questions. So Michael and Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. A very quick one to the applicant again. What would be the notional fee?
Stuart?
My question was just a follow-up on what the applicant was saying there around the minimum number. If they say more, what sort of numbers are we talking? Is it 10? Is it 15? Is it 20? Is it less? So I mean, it'd be nice to have a bit more of a proper sort of solid answer on that rather than the vagueness that we have right now around that.
No, thank you. In anticipation of John deferring to John, we'll ask John to answer, but I'd also like to expand in Mike's question about what is that rate. It'd be good to understand how does that link, is it parity or is it more or less compared to what the council charges for the park access for those tennis courts?
It's a good question. I don't know how much you charge in the park, so I'll have to defer on that one. If someone can tell me, then I will compare it. At the moment, we compare it to Rains Park. So if you play at Rains Park, you pay as an adult £4 to register. That's all it costs to register. It's £2 for children. And then you get the rights to book courts when they're available at any time. The cost of doing that is dependent upon the season and the year, but that is what it is. And to your point about numbers of courts, it is, again, if you could, I don't know, Callum, if you're able to put on the southern part of the site, but it is those courts there. At the moment, we say minimum 7 because each year the maintenance regime changes. Some years courts will be taken out completely for the rest of the year. So after the tournament finishes, that court is then reseeded and is not going to be playable again till the following championships. So it is give sufficient flexibility for those courts to be brought back into proper use. So there is a determination on this site to provide community access to those courts. But what we can't do is guarantee the upper limit. But it is those courts that you see in that section of the site there, which are those which are most likely to be used. And the other reason for that is that one of the player hubs, which is the boathouse, sits within that zone. So that also provides the facilities there for those people playing on those courts. But I would stress we see this very much as an extension of that, which is already happening at Rains Park. And that's sort of, you can go online and look at on the website to see, and would encourage everyone to do so. But it's a nominal fee to join. And then you've got the availability to play on any of the courts. And these are some of the best courts you'll ever play on.
Thank you. Another round, so bring Susie in and then Dan.
Staying with this theme of pay and play, my memory of the Section 106 and the heads of terms is that it's all a bit more amorphous than that. Is there any way that we can tie this down so that this really will be the vision that we're hearing, and people really can pay and play for a reasonable price?
Absolutely. Let's park that for when we go through the 106 and bring that back. And then we've got Dan and then, Tom and then Billy.
Again, just following up something on the modification sheet. 8 of the 38 courts will only ever be used for practice, I think was in the officer report. And then in answer on the modification sheet, the fact that the All England already has sort of 14 nearby courts and other temporary courts. Maybe it's more for the applicant than the officers, but it would seem, if given the obvious work that's being done and their commitment that they've stated to having more open space, it might seem that those 8 of the 38 might seem reasonably unnecessary, given they're not being used to bring the qualifiers home or to provide more courts for spectators to watch the tennis on. So yeah, it'd be useful to hear from the applicant whether those additional 8 are really necessary when, as I say, as already said in the modification sheet, there are already what seems like a substantial number of practice courts nearby.
Okay, thank you. Billy.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. To declare a bit of an interest, Merton Council now is a living wage employer and became one on the 1st of February this year. And I think I'm right in saying this, that because I've just been trying to check that the All England Tennis Association is a living wage employer, right? And just for information, just the living wage has just gone up to £13.50 for London and £12 for the rest of the country. My question, 2 parts to it. I've tried to check all the documentation. There's a lot of generality about jobs, right? It create jobs, great. But has anyone in the applicant scoped the number of jobs it's likely to create, both in the development and when everything's finished? I know that's quite a bit into the future, but would they also, as a living wage employer, because one of the conditions about a living wage employer, as councillors will know, we set aside £8 million to ensure that all our suppliers over the time of the negotiation of the contract will pay the living wage, which is now £13.50. So we set aside it. So will the applicant commit to continue to be a living wage employer? And secondly, that part of the contract, when you become a living wage employer, the contractors you employ to develop, if your application is successful, of course, will you commit to paying a living wage for those staff? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Billy. Very good question. So to summarize, John, I think it's totally different subjects altogether. The rationale of your court strategy, the number of practice courts, and then very poignant questions about the employment generated for the scheme, how many would be living wage, and the additional fund for your supply chain. That'd be really interesting actually to understand a bit more about that, both, I would say, during the construction, but also post as well.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe take the second question first, and I'll pass over to Sally, who will answer that one.
So on the London Living Wage point, so we are a London Living Wage employer, and we insist that all of our contractor groups now also meet London Living Wage, and that would be our intention through both the development and operation of this new site.
Thank you, Sally. Returning then to the question of the 8 courts. Actually, I think the 8 court.
I'll come back to that, don't worry.
Was that the number of jobs, that question?
Sorry, I think it was committing. I think there's probably going to be loads of questions about jobs, to be honest, but I think that it was just committing that those jobs created as part of the construction. I think the scale up would also be living wage as well. I'm assuming they would be from the same, but let's just confirm, I think, and no doubt we'll probably revisit this in the 106 as well.
Returning to the 8 courts, I think the 8 courts being referred to are the 8 courts which actually are primarily there for qualifying 8 courts. So all of the practice courts, I should stress. So all the courts on the site are used both during the championships and during qualifying. And the practice courts will either be used by main tournament players, or they'll be used during the qualifying event for those who are playing and practicing in that. So all courts are used during the championships and qualifying, all 38. I would also stress that they are also used by the junior tennis event, which takes place at the same time or towards the end of the championships, and also the wheelchair tennis. And there is an aspiration that both of those tournaments are expanded. So again, the number of courts on this side takes that into account. So all courts are used during the championships and the qualifying event.
Thank you very much. Another round, colleagues. So we've got Dan and then Kirsten. Dan.
I wanted to ask about the accessibility, but about the T lawn in the northern gated area. I note that in paragraph 63126, Merton's design officer said that it is a shame, well, I paraphrase, doesn't use the word shame, but how I understand it, it's a shame that these areas are going to be closed off to the public. And it would certainly help with the balance of whether very special circumstances have been met if something like this could be opened up and considered. The design officer also says, although not proposed, as potential for an additional hub containing a publicly accessible toilet within a new 9.4 hectare park. The case officer for this simply said this is not part of the proposal, so I can't assess this. But our design officer said this would greatly improve the application. So can I please ask the case officer, and if he can't answer, then he could pass it on to the applicant, what are the reasons for rejecting that? And is that something that could be reconsidered?
Thank you. And Kirsten.
Hi, I did ask the question, but so it's in the mod sheets about how the buildings that are above 500 meters squared will be designed to BREEAM excellence standard. And obviously that doesn't mean that the smaller ones won't be, but can we have a commitment that the whole development and all the buildings would be BREEAM excellence standard? Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, that's extension of the mod sheet about the BREEAM excellence standard. I think it may be helpful just to explain what that standard is when you answer that, and then Dan's question about the accessibility issues in paragraph 6.3.
I know the BREEAM standards are set out in the officer in the mod sheet, and I've got them categorized. But in terms of your question about why certain buildings you don't want.
No, if there's a commitment to have all the development meet the excellence standard.
I think there was in your report, there was quite specific about those buildings which are BREEAM excellent, but on some there wasn't that. Basically, there wasn't a line in the report that says this is also going to be a standard.
It basically falls back to policy. So our policy requires that buildings over 500 square meters achieve very good or higher. So those buildings over 500 square meters, as is necessary, exceed that to provide an excellent BREEAM score. However, and I mentioned this in the mod sheet, that doesn't mean those other buildings aren't going to be designed to a really high standard of sustainability, because you'll see in the section 106 heads of terms that they're required to show how they've maximized carbon savings across the site. So it's very expected as all the buildings come in, that they'd be designed to high standards of sustainability.
Why don't we, before you answer Dan's question, I can take that question to the applicant and maybe they can expand on it and give you the confidence, Kirsten. John, is that something you can expand on, please, in terms of the ancillary buildings below the required BREEAM excellent standard?
Absolutely. I mean, everything we aspire to on the site is a minimum of excellent. We're actually aspiring to outstanding on the majority of buildings. There's some complication, particularly on the show courts, because of the nature of it, which makes it slightly more challenging, but we're committing to a minimum of excellent on all buildings. So that will include those smaller buildings. They're slightly more complicated because they don't fit within the BREEAM regime, but the intention is that they will be very, very sustainable buildings. I say the club has a commitment to be net zero by 2030, so every building has to fit in with that agenda. So that is the intent on site. And as you say, I think we've committed to section 106 and conditions which require us to explain how we perform in each of those buildings as we move forward anyway throughout the development, particularly those which are in outline.
Super. So essentially, it isn't a building requirement. You're going to apply those standards.
We're trying to apply the standards, the highest level of sustainability to all of the buildings.
I saw nods, so that's good. And then, sorry, Callum, you're answering Dan's question about the accessibility of the T-lawn area.
Yeah, so I note the urban design comments around the Northern Gateway area and the T-lawn. It's not something we've considered in detail. However, I do think it's worth noting that the emphasis of the development as a whole is to create continuous areas of public open space, which is provided for by the boardwalk and the LTEC Parkland connecting up with Wimbledon Park. So if we were to theorise about how a space around the T-lawn would work as a public open space, that would need to be cordoned off in some way. And likewise with the Northern Gateway, it would likely have to have a hard boundary, for example, to cordon it off. And actually the emphasis of the design, for example, through the HaHa is to actually avoid hard boundaries in the registered park and garden. So there could be some design issues around that, but generally speaking, it's not something we've considered detail because that's not what's being proposed.
Thank you very much. Another round of questions. So we've got Stuart, and then we'll bring Tom back in.
Thank you. My question is on something that Sally mentioned earlier, and it's something that I've seen brought up a few times, which is on the future of Wimbledon. And my question is kind of what actually is the risk to Wimbledon's future if this doesn't happen? You mentioned there in your comments that you've heard from players that it's not ideal having to go down to Roehampton, but it's Wimbledon. They're not exactly not going to go down there. And, you know, I'm not particularly familiar with Roehampton either, but I don't think anyone's going to be complaining too much about having to spend a day or two there. So my question is, what is actually the risk to Wimbledon's future if this development doesn't happen?
Thank you. And then Tom.
Could the officers provide more detail on what constitutes alternative recreation and sporting use? It seems that, and does a certain amount of this have to be public use, and does it have to be equitable with what was there before what it is replacing? It seems in this case, actually, the access is reduced from what was there before. It may have been a private golf club, but you could get membership, you could pay to play, you could play year round. Whereas the alternative recreation and sporting use is a very limited use, a very limited time of the year, that, as we've heard, may or may not be, could be taken away depending on the quality, you know, the maintenance of the courts and anything else. So yeah, does the new arrangements have to replace or at least be equitable with what was there before?
Thank you. Yes. So work in reverse order. So I think Tom's question for you, probably Callum, is about I would say the test of that. What is that Alltech parkland in terms of accessibility to the public? And while it's not a material question, if the applicant wouldn't mind answering that point, you know, you don't have to because it's not material, but I suppose it would shine a light on the need and urgency of what you proposed in your own statement. But if we work with Callum first, Callum.
Yeah, so I'll respond on the alternative sports and recreational point. So essentially, it's a matter of planning judgment whether a certain land use falls within a certain definition, and that alternative sports and recreation use, it falls under, as you might see in the report, under MOL and also relation to open space. The site contains a public park, a permissive park. It contains the lake, which is open to recreation, and it also contains the tennis facilities. And as a whole, we judge as a matter of planning judgment that it falls within that definition.
Thank you. And then Sally, thank you.
Thank you. So I suppose the obvious point to make about being in a pinnacle position is that everyone else is chasing you and you don't have a right to that position. And certainly the player's view of which events are of the highest quality is very important to retaining that position. And if you take the feedback that we get consistently and have had over many years about the site at Roehampton, and our ability really to invest in that because it isn't our site is limited. Feedback has been consistent from players that we are a long way forth in terms of the quality of our qualifying competition. And so the judgment of the guests that attend the championships and the players that play in it are part of what enables us to maintain that pinnacle position. So we have to keep pushing on in terms of delivering quality experiences for both of those important groups.
Thank you very much for answering. So we've got Susie and then Sherry-Ann, and then it'll be Michael and myself.
This is, I think, one for the applicant. The Roehampton lease is going to run out in 2036, which is 13 years from now. And looking at all the various things which are going to take time, it strikes me as quite possible that the courts, the 38 courts, won't be ready by then. So given that the lease is going to expire, I don't know whether the All England have either explored any statutory protection they might have, or whether they have a plan B, because otherwise it looks as if they are not prepared for 2036.
I think that won't be a material, or that won't be a question of materiality that we would consider. I understand why you've asked it. Again, if the applicant wants to answer that, then that's fine. But I wouldn't put that to them. But I think you made the point for the record. Can I ask Sherry Ann to have a question, please?
Thank you. It slightly leads on from Councillor Barlow's question. There's been a lot of sort of misconception and figures flying about on the golf course access now versus if the application is granted. So I just wanted to really clarify and drill down on the figures if we can here. What proportion of the applicant site is open to the public now, and what will be open to the public if it were to be approved and delivered? Thank you.
Thank you. Callum, could you answer that question, please?
Well, I don't have exact percentages for you, but ultimately the golf course land has been a private members club, so isn't accessible to the public, but we know it was available on a membership basis and for those who paid to play. So, and as a result of this development, you'll see that the 9.4 hectare parkland would provide public access for the majority of the year, subject to the agreed closure periods in the officer report. And then also the boardwalk around the lake, which will increase public access around, albeit the council's estate, but also increase some public access. So I can't give you exact proportions, but that's my answer.
Okay. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. But between Councillor Barlow and Councillor Bim, they've asked my questions.
Fair enough. I mean, without doing getting a calculator here, it would seem probably a third, but we'll find. I would hope that we can get that answer from somewhere. So I think for I've got a question about, and we'll take Susie next, about heritage. And we've talked a lot about Capability Brown, Lancelot Capability Brown, as he was known. And I want to understand, either from the applicant's own research or Callum, what was his intention for the land? And I can't imagine that he wanted a golf course there. So it'd be great to understand what is this heritage that we are talking about? What is the Brownian vision that we are, that everyone's aspiring to be meeting? And in Susie's question.
Mine was just to pick up on something that Sherry Ann said. We've heard a lot about how this is a private golf club, but I have been getting email after email from residents saying that they had access to it. And I don't know whether this is a misunderstanding about Wimbledon Park and the golf club area, or whether in fact, before the golf club closed in January this year, local residents were able to access the park, to walk their dogs, to wander around. I don't know, and I think it needs clarification because it looks as if members of the public think they did in fact have access. And somewhere I have read that when the All England, when the golf finished, the All England locked the gates. So nobody has access to it now except with permission. But I'm just wondering what the situation was before then. Thank you.
I think that's a very fair question. I think it's also slightly muddled up with, there's a lot of different views about what the application site really is. So Callum, if you wouldn't mind addressing Susie's point about, A, what is the application site, of course, but B, the public access arrangement to our knowledge. And then B, my question about what, the heritage aspect, Capability Brown, what was sort of typical of a Brownian landscape as well.
Chair, actually, if we could refer the status of the golf club land to Andrew, please, from a legal perspective.
Andrew, please take it away.
I'll be very brief because in fact, Callum has summarised the position well. It is private land. It was private land. It wasn't publicly accessible. Individuals may or may not, I don't know, have found themselves on the site, technically trespass. I appreciate that's not a particularly big issue, but they were not given explicit permission to be on that site. And that really, Chair, is the end of the matter. It's private land. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Callum, about your understanding of what the Brownian vision is, and sort of typical, and how that met your test basically for heritage.
Yeah, so as you can see, the officer report has quite a detailed heritage assessment. But Capability Brown, he's the former landscape designer who design the historic landscape. When once upon a time there was a manor house up on the hill to the south of the site, and there's certain design features which are retained as a result of the development. Most notably, the lake, which was designed by Brown. And if you don't mind, I might defer to the applicant because I think they'll provide a good summary.
Sure, and we'll no doubt dive deep into features as we go around the maps. John.
Chair, I wonder if it'd be possible to bring on someone who knows a lot more about Capability Brown than I do, and the history of the site, who's involved in all that research. It's Jeanette Emery-Wallace, who's from LUC, if that's okay.
Thanks very much, John. So Capability Brown was commissioned by the first Earl Spencer twice in the 1760s and the 1780s, we believe. Why did he commission him? Brown was an eminent landscape architect at the time. He was a royal gardener, so he was in charge of all the royal properties. And the reason why he employed him was that when Earl Spencer inherited the site from his grandmother, he was only 11 and a half years old. And during that time, as he grew up to become an adult, his trustees bought considerable amounts of land to expand the original Wimbledon Manor estate. So it got up to 390 hectares in size, so considerably larger than today's remnant. So today we only have 76 of that 390, and that includes the public park as well as the All England Club owned land and the lake. So a small remnant. And his vision, or capability, is his nickname, and he was capable of seeing the vision for a site, and also to be practical. So this site was basically to show off to his friends and neighbours his manor house set in a very large country estate. So the mansion is the focal point of the master plan. Capability Brown created the lake that we have today. The reason why he created the lake was because we have a number of streams that run across that site. It meant that the centre of the site was very marshy, and it meant that it couldn't be used as pasture or for grazing. So it was much more practical to create an ornamental lake, which would give the focus to the site. But it also would then provide fishing. It's an ice house, it's also practical. And that's one of the key remnant features of today's landscape, one of the key 18th century features. And it's why the site is one of the reasons why it is Grade 2 star listed by Heritage England. But essentially, he was creating a parkland. And it's all about making your parkland look as large as possible. So Capability Brown sort of painted with trees. He used individual trees. He planted in clumps. He planted tree belts. So it's all about a sweeping, organic, naturalistic landscape. It's all from naturalistic. I mean, a lot of it was man-made, made to look like nature. But that's essentially what he was trying to do.
Thank you for that comprehensive overview. I'd like to call Michael in, and then I've got a question, and then we'll go Tom, and then we'll go Billy. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. I was previously employed as a tour guide in a Capability Brown garden. So I just wanted to ask the applicant, how much of the original Capability Brown design continues today? Is it just the lake really that is the preserved part? And how much of Brownian design are you planning to incorporate in your design? For example, the long winding paths, etc. Thank you.
Sure. I'll just pause there, see if Callum can answer that first. I think my question would actually be expanding a lot more on, I believe both Sally and John maybe mentioned net zero commitment. And I'd like to hear, how does this site actually support net zero? I read a lot about the ground source heat pumps, and in the section 106, the supporting a neighbourhood heat network. It'd be good to understand how does this actually work in practice, so as in the sense of the site itself, is it going to be net zero first and then the main site as well? So two questions there. One is about how much is actually left, and if the applicant can answer that, by all means. And my one is about that net zero commitment for the site.
So on the Capability Brown, yeah. So if you look in subsection 6.4 on heritage, you'll notice that I mentioned some of the remnant capability brown features, which include some of the trees which match up with the alignment of the Great Avenue, which once led to the manor house, and those appear to correspond with the previous location of trees planted by Capability Brown. The report also highlights some succession planting, which maintains Capability Brown's original design. Obviously, the lake, which has been mentioned, that is the most pivotal feature, which still is there today. And those are the main ones, and I'd let the applicant, if they want to elaborate on that anymore.
Sure.
I think I'll pass over to Jeanette again.
No problem. Historic England, who are the statutory body in charge of historic
Mike, Jeanette.
Sorry. Historic England, who are the statutory body in charge of historic landscapes, class the site as a highly degraded remnant piece of former Capability Brown landscape. And as we've heard earlier, it's classed as at risk on their register, which means, and the reasons for its at risk nature are the condition of the lake, the impact of views from recently planted trees, the fragmented land ownership, and the lack of cohesion in terms of overall management of the site. So at the moment, we don't read the public park and the former golf course and lake as one integral landscape. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And then my question was about the net zero commitment, because I read in the papers that the plan was to have a ground source heat pump, which then would make both sites net zero, but it was unclear how that would actually work.
Yes, Chair, and we have held conversations with the applicants and agents specifically about this, and there are existing and proposed energy centres, and there will be a network between the two. For the detail, I think it's probably best that the applicant elaborates on that, Chair.
Thank you, John.
I will endeavour to do my best, but thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, the net zero does, it's worth saying, embrace everything. It's not simply just about this site and this building. It is about the entire All England Club operation that comes in. It's travel patterns, it's materials, it's the whole way that the site operates. So in terms of this site specifically, what we are looking at, is you're absolutely correct, is ground source heat pumps to provide energy and electricity. And the way that will then work is it will feed in, there's an energy centre which sits underneath or beneath the Park Lane Show Court. That will link back into the main site, and that will help to provide energy to those buildings there. So one of the objectives that has been going on, not part of this application, I hasten to add, is that the centralisation of various energy centres within the All England Club to achieve that objective. For instance, Somerset Road has one, air source heat pumps, and there's another one in number 1 court, and it's by linking the buildings all together, alongside, I have to say, a large number of measures about lighting, building fabric and all the rest, insulation, glazing, etc., which goes into meeting that objective from a building point of view. But I would stress the net zero is covering a far greater sphere in terms of the All England Club operation.
Thank you very much. So we had Tom and then Billy next, and then for the next round, we'll have Dan and then Stuart, and then I'll go Susie next. So Tom.
Just following on from Sherry Ann's question, which was now for a while ago. The 9.4 hectares of public park was mentioned. How many hectares of the site still won't be accessible to the public?
Thank you. And Billy?
Yeah, Chair. Thanks, Sally, for the answer on the living wage, but I don't think I got an answer on the number of jobs created in the development and the number of jobs likely to be post-development. I know that's a lot. You know, some figure would be useful.
No, absolutely. If so, of course, I'll ask Callum if he's got those details and maybe bring Sally in. So I think further clarity on 9.4 hectares accessible, but what is inaccessible, so we can work out what that percentage is. And then Billy's point about the economic benefit, I think would be helpful for my understanding to talk about the scale up, scale down element, because I think at one point there's a scale up to thousands, but it's good to just understand what is permanent in terms of the employment benefits.
I'll give this one to my team leader, Tim Bryson, to answer on the jobs.
Thank you, Callum. Thank you, Chair. So I set out within the report, there is a section on employment and job creation by the proposal. So it currently does outline that during the existing championships, the 6,400 jobs created to support the event. The proposals will increase the number of jobs required to host the event, the both qualifying and championships, by another 256. So it'll be 256 on top of those existing jobs there that currently serve the existing championships in its current form. And further, you're looking at additional sort of 18 seasonal staff employed in terms of permanent positions for the maintenance and management of the parkland and also the wider qualifying courts areas. 40 full-time roles. So in terms of, there's also some construction related employment naturally. So the construction period is estimated to be sort of 8 years, I believe, 8 to 10 years. So it has been outlined within their submission. They anticipate that, for example, the construction of the Parkland Show Court, which would be a bit further down the line, should this be passed this evening, be 300 to 400 construction jobs just for that facility in itself. So I hope that assists, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And then it was back to Tom's question about the 9.4 is accessible. What is inaccessible?
So yeah, there's the 9.4 hectare park, and the site as a total, which includes the lake, to be fair, is 39.7 hectares. So that gives you a rough idea, but you've got to take into account obviously the lake forms part of that, and that's rough, just over 20%. But that's me crunching some numbers just now.
Does that exclude the lake? Does that include the lake in the accessible calculation? Because we can access the lake as long as we've got a boat.
Yeah, so to clarify, I was just trying to give you an idea of the proportion of the parkland, LTEC parkland in relation to the site as a whole. I'm not giving you an exact figure on publicly accessible land. And I appreciate that as the question, but I don't have that figure exactly.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so we had Dan and then Stuart next.
I wanted to ask about biodiversity net gain. So I read in the report that this application is a little bit exceptional. We've had professional independent ecologists come in and they've done their calculations and they've done what? They've found 13% habitat benefit, 31% hedgerows, hunts and rivers, and that normally, what kind of figures would you typically be looking for biodiversity net gain in an application of this size? It's normally single digits. Could you clarify for that? And further to that, I note in 6.17.27, it says that without investment, this land would deteriorate. So am I right in thinking that with this application, we can help the planet fight the climate emergency, we could improve our biodiversity, and without this application, we will see its deterioration and destruction?
Thank you very much. And Stuart.
My question is on a similar sort of theme, which is on the use of the concrete in the plan. It's obviously great to have air source heat pumps and to have commitments on a number of sustainability standards for the number of buildings that are being constructed. But how do they square the use of substantial amount of concrete with that net zero claim, and to what extent did they give consideration to other more sustainable building materials, for example, things like cross-laminated timber, which is a genuinely sustainable building material, rather than just resorting to concrete?
Both very good questions. Yeah, so summary, the biodiversity net gain, the risk of not improving the land and it deteriorating further versus leaving it as it is in nature to see fit. And Stuart's very good question about the use of concrete. If I can add into that bit, I think the applicant also mentioned some prefab concrete structures to reduce traffic. If you've got any details on that as well, that'd be quite helpful.
Yeah, so on the biodiversity net gain, the policy test is actually just to provide biodiversity net gain full stop. It doesn't actually specify the amount, but forthcoming legislation does ask, the Environment Act does ask for 10%, which falls outside the planning system. But so theoretically, they could pass a biodiversity net gain test just by providing 1%, but that might not be considered so much of a benefit. But they are providing over 10%. I don't have the exact figure, but over 10% in relation to habitats. But there's also other units which are being applied, linear units, and I forget the other one, but essentially they are exceeding the targets on net gain for all three of those units. And yeah, that's the basis of that.
Thank you. And it was the question relating to Stuart and concrete. We can pass it to the applicant as well if you need some.
Yeah, we'll pass that one to the applicant if that's okay.
Sure, John. I also remember on the site visit, I think there was discussions of the, building the courts off site and bringing them to the site. It'd be great if that's progressed further. If you could
Correct.
talk about that.
I can do, yes, correct. So we'll pick up the wider use in the short bit, but yes, in terms of the ring beams which sit around the grass courts, those already we're looking at low carbon technology for those as concrete, and they will be prefabricated off site and then brought to site, which is, as you say, intended to reduce the amount of travel and trips to the site, also reducing construction time because it's much easier to put them on site. So that is relation to that, and already that is using and likely to use low carbon forms. In terms of the main buildings, of course, those are in outline, but we are exploring all those forms of trying to minimize the amount of carbon with the construction materials. We are looking absolutely at laminated timber and other timber solutions for the site and those more sustainable options. So that is definitely something that we are intending to do. That information will form part of that planning application. So we will be duty bound to submit reserve matters applications for each of the principal buildings, including the Parkland Show Court. So in doing so, we would have to explain to you and to the council what measures we have taken to minimise the amount of carbon, particularly in the construction materials through whole life carbon site assessments, which we have to do each time those new buildings come on stream. So very much we are looking at all those. At the moment, the likelihood is if there is concrete, it will be beneath the buildings to stabilise the buildings. Unfortunately, that's probably the way they have to go, but we are examining all opportunities for structure outside the building. So definitely an objective.
Sure. And John would like to come back on the first question, then we'll do another round.
Yes, just to confirm the figures that Callum was referring to, Chair, in terms of the biodiversity net gain. If I could draw the attention of members to paragraph 6.6.77 of the report, this states that the ecological proposals to the site which serve to mitigate and enhance the biodiversity value of it include significant biodiversity net gain of 12.93% habitat units, 31.6% hedgerow units, and 100% for river units. So these are substantial figures, Chair.
Very substantial. Thank you, John, for outlining that and finding that so quickly. So we'll do Susie, Tom, and just before we go, colleagues, I'm keen also to now to start doing a bit of a deeper dive, but we are approaching 2-hour mark. So I do want to have a break for everyone just to refresh, and for those in the back to refresh as well as needed. So what we'll do is we'll take, so for the next round of questions, who will be interested to ask a question? So we've got Susie, Tom, who else? Kirsten, and that's it. Okay. And then we'll go Dan as well. Yeah. Okay. So we'll do that round, and then we'll move to looking at the northern part of the plan specifically, and then we'll just move around. So Susie.
Can I be greedy? I have two. One's very short and one's slightly longer.
Fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. First one is the biodiversity net gain calculation. My understanding is this is going to take decades for it to happen. 32 years for the trees to grow to maturity, and long periods of construction when basically everything is going to be obliterated. So I wondered over what period this net gain was calculated. I have the figure 60 years in my head. I'm not sure where from. I'd be grateful for clarification on that. That's number one. Number two is something which everybody else has been talking about in terms of the deterioration of the registered park, which I completely understand is highly undesirable. But it says in the mod sheet that it's at risk and there's no statutory protection because it's at risk. But it's also grade 2 star listed. And I wondered what obligations the owners, that's both the All England and Merton, have to not allow it to fall into disrepair, whether we're talking about the lake or the veteran trees. Are there obligations that Merton should be complying with and the All England should be complying with if this application doesn't go ahead.
Thank you. And then Tom?
Sorry, just to go back to the maths, which I appreciate none of us want to be doing at 9 o'clock. But so if the total site is 39 hectares, 25% of that's the lake. So if we're working, say 20, that's sort of 29, 30-ish, my quick maths. 9.5 hectares of that are the public park. So 20 hectares still won't be open to the public. Does that sound about right?
Thank you. So let's work in reverse. So, or do you want to crunch numbers and verify?
I can't confirm the figures. It might be worth us crunching the numbers in the break and then providing those.
I think that's a very good suggestion. So let's do that, and we'll come back on that, Tom. So Susie's point A and B, obviously, I think it goes back to our general theme, and we've heard it from our speakers, both Richard and Susan, about the where the development versus the benefits you see. If you can outline that in terms of biodiversity, and then again the obligations that the Grade 2 listing puts on the owners to bring the land back to a state of repair.
Thank you, Chair. We've been doing some research about the statutory requirements around the protection of the RPG, and I'd like to just bring Emily in, if I could, please, as she's had a specific look at this.
Emily, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Emily Knowles, another legal advisor to the committee. So the registered park and garden is on the on Heritage England's at-risk register. Unlike other sort of heritage assets, being on the at-risk register doesn't, for a registered park and garden, require a landowner to do anything in particular in terms of statutory duties. So being on the at-risk register does not provide any statutory protection or require the landowner to maintain the land to a particular standard. So essentially the only sort of benefit of being on the at-risk register and being an RPG is that in terms of planning applications, it's a material planning consideration.
Thank you very much. And again, I think just going back then to that quick fire one about biodiversity and time and how that's factored in.
Thanks, Chair. I'll answer this in part and then maybe get the applicant to elaborate if they wish to. But on biodiversity net gain, the BNG metric accounts for timescales for different habitats and species. So the answer is it depends actually on what happens. So you might get the trees which take a bit longer to mature than, for example, your shrubs. So it depends on the particular type of green infrastructure you're implementing. But I'll let the applicant, if they wish to elaborate on that.
John?
Yes, if you'd indulge us just to bring our ecologist in to explain that, Niall.
Thank you, Chair. Neil Machin, I'm a Director of Ecology at LUC. Yes, it's as Callum suggested, the biodiversity net gain calculator has a sort of a time to achieve your target condition for different habitats. So as the councillor said, for trees to achieve a target habitat, it could be 32 years, but it varies for habitats. So to create amenity grasslands, your sort of bog standard lawns is 1 year, the lake footprint is 7 years, acid grassland 12 years, some of the enhancements of woodlands 10 years. So it's different. And that sort of reflects really the metric that DEFRA have created in terms of achieving a target condition. Obviously, those habitats will be created in advance of that, and then they'll be there and there'll be a benefit for wildlife. But in terms of the metric, in terms of they're sort of achieving the target condition, they have a set number of years, which is built into the calculator. Just to add that the biodiversity net gain it's not the only enhancement. You know, there's things outside the BNG calculator in terms of bird boxes, sand martin banks, kingfisher banks. There are additional things which will be in and enhancements for wildlife. As the biodiversity net gain is the DEFRA metric that we are obliged to use to enable a sort of level playing field for developments to improve for wildlife.
Sorry, I'll just take Chair's prerogative and come back on that quickly. So obviously there's the official DEFRA metric. So just to confirm, you're saying there's a lot of additional stuff you're implementing with this scheme, which hasn't been calculated at all. Have you done your own private calculation of if they were a part of the DEFRA calculation, how that would affect or the additional benefits overall. So we get a complete calculation.
It's a separate, the BNG calculation is a new DEFRA metric just to as I say, introduce a level playing field to try and assess net gain for all developments. So there's a 10% target, as Callum suggested, is coming in. But as well as that BNG, there's a whole suite of wildlife legislation that we have to comply with in terms of bat legislation and birds and so on. So we the individual species enhancement for those individual species of bats and birds is outside of the BNG calculation, because the BNG calculation is purely a habitat based. So they're separate. So you have to view the whole in terms of the whole enhancement that the scheme is delivering.
Thank you very much. So I'll take the final two on this, and then we'll move just focusing on the northern half, and then we'll break at the 2 hour mark. So I think Kirsten and Dan wanted to go next. Kirsten.
So a bit related to biodiversity and heritage. The officer's report includes comments by Dr. Dawson, a third-party ecologist, who has concerns that transplanting trees is difficult to implement. So I'm curious whether we've calculated the risk of transplanting the 18 existing trees, which includes 2 A category and 5 B category trees. And is there a contingency and the impact that would have should they, die?
I think it's a really good question. I was thinking how they would do that as well. Dan.
I wanted to go back to the 7 grass courts, because I remember reading, and I'm trying to find it, that access to the community was caveated with subject to maintenance. So when we were hearing about this minimum of 7, it was already caveated with the idea that it's only subject to the courts being maintained properly. So as that is the case anyway, that this minimum can be caveated with maintenance, can't we have a higher minimum with that caveat? Why not 10 subject to maintenance?
Thank you. So going back, I think it would be good. So Callum, it'd be good to understand how that tree planting would work again. The applicant may need to come in and any contingencies. And again, I think where you're getting at, Dan, is just understanding the complexities of those 7 courts, but I think also what's the contingency plan if all of them for some reason maintenance-wise couldn't be accessed. So if we go in first order, so the first question about the tree planting, the tree transplantation rather.
Yeah, so on the trees, what I would say is that we've had a tree consultant review the scheme as a whole, and they're satisfied with the tree proposals set out and that they are in accordance with policy. But in terms of contingency, there is a condition for a tree health review. So after a certain period, after the development is completed, the applicant has to review the trees on site and provide a suitable replacement strategy should any of those trees not be up to scratch in terms of health.
Thank you. And I suspect you're going to defer the second question to the applicant.
That would be helpful, Chair, because my understanding is it won't be limited to 7 courts or 7 specific courts. This will be a rolling arrangement to help with the maintenance. So it can be organised that there are 7 courts remain available, but that is a detail I would like the agent to elaborate on, please, Chair.
Sure, John.
Thanks, Chair. To be fair, that's the answer. It is a minimum 7. Correct. And it's just to allow the flexibility that they can move around. So it is not a specific 7. It's the fact that some of those courts in the area will have to be maintained at some point during that period of time. So it is minimum 7, but they will be moving around depending on which courts are in play.
Thank you. All right, I'd like now, so we've done a lot of focus on the general aspect of the scheme, heard a lot on heritage, about capability Brown's vision, the craftsmanship, and sort of change in the landscape to suit a particular design. We've heard a lot about climate change. We've also heard a lot about the immediate disruption in terms of the biodiversity, but also the net gain as a result of that. I'd like to now turn specific remarks on the northern part of the scheme, and it's called diagram proposed general arrangement detailed view 1. If you can bring that up, and then I would like to call a break in just 10 minutes time. and then we'll be back afterwards in 15 minutes. So if we spend at least 10 minutes on this, and this area, just to remind everyone, it covers the Northern Gateway and some 19 of the tennis courts, and the lake-based part of the boardwalk and the culvert. So do we have any questions specifically on these bits? I mean, I've got a question on the culvert. I don't know if anyone else has. So Susie first, and then I'll go my question.
I'm not sure I'm right about this, but I recall reading somewhere that the Northern Gateway area was going to be closed to the public. I got that right?
Good question. And my question is about the culvert. I was just actually understanding the benefit of actually doing that, and how does that improve the wildlife, or is that more an artistic benefit to get back to the original Brownian vision of what the lake looked like?
Yeah, so on the first question about the Northern Gateway being closed to the public, it forms part of LTEC's private estate, so would not be accessible to the public, apart from if you were a spectator, entering the championships.
The culvert.
So yeah, the culvert generally, it is a historic brook which feeds the lake. So that is capability brown focused. But obviously one of the benefits from opening that up is due to ecology, but also aesthetics. That will provide a very nice feature in and around the lake to add to the parkland setting.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more round on the northern bit. Does anyone want to ask a question on that? I'm feeling a need for an early break. Okay, all right. So why don't we call it there? So we'll break for 15 minutes, and if the committee will go into the side room as needed, and public gallery will disperse as needed and be escorted by security to the restrooms. Thank you very much. Back in 15 minutes, which is just after half.